Hi, greetings. This is Esther with Story Blessings Astrology. And let's talk about Mercury retrograde. People freak out. Oh my God, it's Mercury retrograde. Everything's going to go wrong. The sky's going to fall. Not true. Not true. Mercury goes retrograde, meaning it's going to move back over the degrees that it has already passed. It's going to do that 3 or 4 times a year for 3 weeks at a time. So it's going to be happening. It doesn't mean all kinds of crazy things are going to go on and you can't sign contracts and you can't buy equipment, and it doesn't really mean that. Mercury is really the mischievous messenger of the gods, and so just like when you used to play telephone as a kid, and you pass on, you'd say something to somebody and then that person said something to the next person, and by the time it got around to the end of the circle, totally the message has changed. So that's some of the mischievous of Mercury around communication. So Mercury rules how we communicate, how we think, how we organize our thoughts on a daily basis, how we take care of the details of daily living. So when Mercury goes retrograde, or appears to go backwards through the signs it's already, the degrees of the signs it's already passed, we really just get to revisit how we've been thinking about those particular parts of our lives, and maybe do a reboot. So in order, with your computer, when you do a reboot, you have to shut it off, right? You have to stop running all the programs and then restart it again. And really, Mercury retrograde, that's what it asks us to do. It's a reboot in the areas that are being affected. So how do we know which areas are being affected? Well, we know which constellations the Mercury is moving through. We know the degrees that it's moving through, and where that falls in your personal chart, and what is affected by that Mercury movement. That's what it's going to mean for you. So it's not going to mean the same thing for everyone. So sometimes during Mercury retrograde, yeah, my computer glitches out. I lose all my photos, or I lose all my contacts. But it's not going to happen all the time. It might have, probably did when that happened some years ago. It hit the part of my chart that was about organization. And I really didn't have my stuff really organized well on the computer. And guess what? I had to redo it all over again. Was I frustrated? Yes. Was I irritated? Yes. But did I know what was happening? Yes. And I took advantage of what the influences of the planets were bringing to me to kind of clean up my own act a little bit around my computer. So it's not a bad thing. It's a time to review. It's a time to revisit how you were thinking about certain things, maybe how you were communicating. Maybe it's a perfect time to clean up some communication that you had with someone that maybe you don't feel so good about. So Mercury retrograde gives you the opportunity to kind of go over things. And we're a very forward moving culture. We don't like to review too much. We do like to go over in our minds all the things that have bothered us, and maybe have punitive thoughts towards ourselves, to things we could have done better. That's not the best use of that energy. The best use of Mercury is, am I thinking in a proper way in order to get to where I want to be in my life, whether at this particular stage in my life or maybe big picture. So sometimes you have to sign a contract during Mercury retrograde. Let's say you're buying a house or selling a house, or it's like in the moment. Does that mean you should not? These are my wonderful crystals, which I use for my meditation. Talk about that on another video. Back to Mercury. So you have to sign a contract, and they always say, oh, don't sign a contract during Mercury retrograde. Well, sometimes you have to. So you triple check the details. You should be triple checking the details anyway of every contract that you sign. But if you don't do it during Mercury retrograde, you get lax, you get careless, the repercussions might be more obvious. So we know that when we get contracts these days, sometimes contracts are like, 10 pages long. I don't want to read it. Well, make sure you do if it's Mercury retrograde, or get a professional lawyer, whoever reads those kind of things and helps you with it. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to get clear on your thinking, get clear on your communication, and take a little rest out. Best thing to do during Mercury retrograde, if you can, is travel. Because when we travel, we tend not to be so rigid about how things have to be. Because, when you travel, you can't be rigid because you're in other systems than your own, and things are inevitably going to go differently than you had thought. And so that like going with the flow energy is really perfect for Mercury retrograde, and somehow it seems to be easier to do when we're not in our home front where we're hyper controlling everything. so maybe when Mercury goes retrograde 3 or 4 times a year, you take the time to have a little vacation at your own house with yourself. Kind of take yourself off the hook for having to be perfect, or having to do things exactly the way somebody else told you it had to be done. So these are really respite times during the year of review and revisiting, and looking at things in a clearer way. And then, over time, when you start following the signs that Mercury goes retrograde, and you can see how that's directly affecting your personal life and the collective as well. And you can use that energy to rest, reboot, review, and do things over in the way that is going to work the best for you. So not to be afraid of Mercury retrograde, but use it to your advantage. Thanks so much for joining me today. Talk a little bit about Mercury retrograde. This is Esther with Starry Blessings Astrology. You are love always, and you will always return back to love.